It was a warm evening in Memphis, and excitement buzzed through the air. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was about to perform one of his biggest shows of the year. Fans had been lining up since early morning, some even sleeping overnight just to get a glimpse of the legend. But while most of the crowd was cheering, smiling, and holding tickets in their hands, one boy stood still outside the gate, empty-handed. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old. His clothes were worn, shoes scuffed, and his eyes fixed on the glowing lights of the concert hall. Every now and then he'd step forward when the guards weren't looking, hoping maybe, just maybe, they'd let him in. But each time, they sent him back, shaking their heads. "Sorry, kid, no ticket, no entry." People walked past him. Some gave him a sympathetic glance. Others ignored him completely. He wasn't being loud. He wasn't causing trouble. He just stood there with the kind of quiet hope that breaks your heart a little. This wasn't just any show for him. This was Elvis, his idol, his escape, maybe even his only joy in a tough life. What nobody knew was that this small boy had saved every spare penny for weeks, doing odd jobs, washing cars, even skipping lunch at school just to scrape together money for a ticket. But it wasn't enough. By the time he had close to what he needed, the show was sold out. Still, he came. He stood at the gate, eyes wide, as if willing a miracle to happen. And that's when fate stepped in. Backstage, Elvis was preparing to go on. Dressed in his iconic white jumpsuit, collar popped and sideburns perfectly in place, he was the picture of cool. But Elvis was never just about the image. He was a man with a heart, and somehow that night something tugged at it. As he walked past a narrow hallway near the entrance, he glanced through the glass doors and paused. Among the crowd of buzzing fans, one figure stood out, small, still, sad. Elvis squinted, then turned to a nearby security guard. "Who's that kid?" The guard shrugged. "Just some poor boy without a ticket. Been standing there all evening. Keeps trying to get in." Elvis didn't hesitate. "Bring him in," he said, voice firm. The guard blinked. "Sir." "Me said, bring him in," Elvis repeated, "then give him a front row seat." Minutes later, the boy was led through the hall by two security guards, but not in cuffs, in awe. His eyes darted around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The crowd parted for him, confused, some even frowning. Why him? He was taken straight to the front, and when Elvis stepped out on stage moments later, he didn't say a word about it. He just nodded once in the boy's direction. That was enough. It's enough. What that child felt in that moment can't be put into words. All the pain, the rejection, the heartbreak, wiped away by a single act of kindness from the king himself. Elvis never told the press, never used it for publicity. But everyone in the crew knew this wasn't a one-time thing. It was just who he was. Because sometimes true greatness isn't about the stage, it's about what you do before the curtain rises. As the lights dimmed and the music roared to life, the crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. But the boy, he didn't move. He sat frozen in the front row, as if afraid to blink in case the moment vanished. Just hours ago, he was standing alone behind a locked gate, and now he was staring up at the biggest star in the world, only a few feet away. Elvis owned the stage that night, like always. Every movement, every note, every glance made the crowd go wild. But every so often, in the middle of a song, his eyes would drift back to that boy, a small reminder of something bigger than fame. The boy didn't know the words to every song. He wasn't one of those fans who had posters and records at home. But what he felt was something far deeper. He clutched the edge of his seat, smiling wider than he ever had before. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen him. Between songs, Elvis gave a rare pause. He didn't explain anything. He didn't tell the crowd what he had done. But before starting the next number, he said softly into the mic, "Sometimes, the best seat in the house is the one you give away." The crowd clapped, not fully understanding, but feeling something different in the air. That moment wasn't about a ticket. It wasn't even about music. It was about dignity, about a child who felt invisible and was suddenly treated like he mattered. When the show ended and the lights came up, people began leaving. The boy remained in his seat, eyes wide, heart full. A crew member tapped his shoulder and said, "Come on, kid. Elvis wants to meet you." He thought he misheard. But soon he found himself in a backstage room face to face with the man himself. Elvis smiled, reached out and said, "You made my night, kid." No camera crew, no crowd, just the two of them. He handed the boy a signed scarf, one he'd worn on stage, and told him, Keep this, and remember, don't let anyone ever tell you you don't belong somewhere." That scarf would never leave the boy's side. That night wouldn't just stay with him for days or weeks, it would stay with him forever. Years later, the boy, now a grown man, would still talk about that night. Not in the way people boast about seeing a famous concert. No, he spoke about it the way people talk about miracles. He would tell his kids, "You won't believe this, but Elvis Presley once brought me into his concert." And when his children laughed, thinking it was just a bedtime story, he'd pull out an old, slightly faded white scarf, soft, worn, but still carrying the scent of that unforgettable evening. But here's the part most people never knew. That wasn't the only time Elvis did something like this. Stories started to surface from across the country. A girl who couldn't afford medicine got help from a donation that quietly came from a friend. A struggling single mother who suddenly had rent paid. A local orphanage that received boxes of toys at Christmas with no note, just a message from someone who cares. Elvis wasn't perfect. He had his struggles like everyone else. Fame, pressure, personal pain. But beneath the glittering suits and the screaming crowds was a man who never forgot what it felt like to grow up poor, hungry, and looked down upon. He often said, "The people who made me are the ones who had the least." He remembered what it was like to be the boy on the outside of the gate. That's why he opened doors whenever he could. That moment with the boy in Memphis was just one example of a bigger truth. Elvis Presley used his fame not just to shine, but to lift others into the light. And he didn't do it for applause. He didn't do it for headlines. He did it quietly, with kindness, because the real king of rock and roll wasn't just the man who topped the charts. He was the man who saw value in people the world tried to ignore. That boy never forgot it. And maybe, just maybe, if we remember that story, we'll think twice the next time we see someone left out, turned away, or standing behind the gate. Because sometimes the greatest thing you can give is a seat at the front. The usher at the entrance stood firm, his arms crossed, shaking his head. "Sorry, kid. No ticket, no entry." The boy's hopeful smile slowly faded as he looked around, not knowing what to do next. The concert was starting soon. People in glamorous outfits were walking past him, flashing their shiny tickets with pride, laughing and heading inside. But here he was, stuck behind the velvet ropes, feeling smaller by the second. Just then, the roar of a car pulling up caught his attention. A long black Cadillac rolled to a smooth stop, and out stepped a man dressed in black, surrounded by security. It was Elvis. He waved at the crowd, flashing that famous smile. The fans went wild. But as he started walking toward the building, something made him stop. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was fate. He looked over and saw the boy. Their eyes met for just a second, and something shifted. Elvis whispered to one of his team members, then turned and walked toward the boy. People froze. What was happening? The security parted like the Red Sea as Elvis approached the kid. He knelt slightly to meet the boy at eye level and said, "I heard you wanted to come see the show." The boy could barely speak. He just nodded. "Well then," Elvis smiled, pulling something out of his jacket pocket. "Let's make sure you see it right." In his hand was a front row ticket. Not just any seat, but one of the best in the house. The boy's eyes filled with tears. He didn't know whether to cry or laugh. The people around gasped. Some clapped. Some just stood in silence, witnessing a moment that didn't need words. As Elvis handed him the ticket, he gave the boy a wink. "Enjoy the show, kid." That small gesture said so much. It wasn't just about the music or the fame. It was about kindness. It was about being seen. And in that moment, one boy's life changed forever. What many didn't see that night, or on any night, really was the side of Elvis that lived in the shadows. Not the king on the stage, not the global icon, but the humble boy from Tupelo who knew what it felt like to be poor, to be ignored, to be told you can't. Behind the bright lights and glittering jumpsuits was a man who never forgot where he came from. His generosity wasn't just for the cameras. Just for the cameras. In fact, most of it happened when no one was watching. Elvis often gave away cars to people who needed a ride. He paid hospital bills for strangers. He donated money to charities quietly, never asking for attention. But this small act of kindness toward a boy he didn't know said more than any donation ever could. It showed his heart. The truth is, Elvis saw himself in that child. A kid with big dreams held back by something as simple as money, and Elvis knew exactly how that felt. He remembered being the boy who couldn't afford lunch, the boy who borrowed clothes to look presentable at school, the boy who used music as a way out of poverty and pain. So when he saw that child turned away at the gates of his own concert, something inside him couldn't let it go. Maybe it reminded him of the doors that were once closed to him. Or maybe it was just the kind of man he had always been, someone who chose kindness even when he didn't have to. In a world full of people chasing fame, Elvis stayed grounded in something deeper: compassion. And perhaps that's what made him truly unforgettable. Not just the voice, not just the moves, but the way he made people feel. That night he didn't just give away a ticket. He gave a kid a memory, a moment of belonging, and the kind of story that would be told for generations. Even now, long after he's gone, moments like this remind us why Elvis wasn't just a star. He was a legend with a heart. Elvis stood still for a second, just as the final rehearsal was wrapping up. The stage lights were dimmed, the seats mostly empty, but something outside the auditorium caught his eye. A commotion. A small boy, no more than 10 years old, was standing at the entrance, eyes wide, heart full, but face covered in tears. A security guard stood in front of him, stern and unmoved. "You can't come in here without a ticket, kid," the guard barked. "I just wanted to hear him sing," the boy whispered. "Just once." Elvis walked closer to the stage edge, peering into the shadows. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he didn't need to. He'd been that boy. Not long ago. Poor, overlooked, ignored, someone who'd been told he didn't belong. The memory of being the only kid at school without lunch money, of wearing the same shirt every day because it was all he had, came flooding back like a wave. Without hesitation, Elvis hopped off the stage and made his way through the side aisle. Everyone around him froze. "Where's he going? Zorn," someone muttered. He walked straight up to the boy and bent down so their eyes met. "What's your name, buddy?" he asked softly. The boy sniffled, a boy sniffled, a Billy. "Oh well, Billy," Elvis said with a warm grin. "How about watching the show from the front row tonight?" Billy's eyes lit up, his sadness replaced by pure shock. The guard looked stunned. Elvis reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed the usher a $20 bill, more than enough back then for the best seat in the house. "Make sure he sits right in front," Elvis said. "Or right where he can see everything." The entire crew stood in silence, watching this quiet act of kindness unfold. No cameras, no press, just Elvis and a boy who needed a break. As Billy took his seat, wiping his face with his sleeve, Elvis stepped back onto the stage. He picked up his guitar, strummed a few notes, and smiled to himself. He didn't just change Billy's night, he changed his life. And maybe, just maybe, he reminded everyone else in that room what real greatness looks like. If this story moved you, even just a little, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists. Elvis may be gone, but his legacy of compassion is something we can all carry forward. What would you do if you had the chance to lift someone up like that? Let us know in the comments. Your words might inspire someone else to do the same.